for coming and joining this session this morning. Most of you are invited as speakers and panelists, but it's nice to see one or two also joining us out of interest. And we're going to talk about the pathways to sustainable land use and multifunctional landscapes, green technologies, and climate finance. As part of the opening of this, we will show a short film from the CGIAR President, Ban Ki-moon, who will just welcome everybody here. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about what we're going to try and discuss today. The purpose of the event is to discuss our understanding of multifunctional landscapes. I'm then going to share the story of sustainable land use from Ethiopia, looking at implementation over about 25 years, and some of the key game changers of why Ethiopia has started to achieve real results in sustainable landscape management. And from that, we'll take a dive into protected areas, because protected areas, I would argue, and I hope we will debate, they are an outlier because they have not, in most cases, adopted the same participatory approaches to landscape and inclusive approaches to landscape management as forestry and agriculture. And we will then move on to talking about innovation and green development opportunities. We have a special guest from the private sector, Susan Payne, who I met at this event, and she's generously agreed to talk to us about her green technology and innovations and her experience of green technology and investment in agriculture in Africa. And then we also have the very experienced Tero from CGIAR, who will talk about his experience predominantly in Asia, but also in the Middle East on climate finance. So let's get started with our opening video, please.
Excellencies, member states, and institutional partners of the Global Green Institute, CGIAR, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Hello and assalamu alaikum. I'd like to welcome everyone to this event, organized on the sidelines of the 16th session of the Conference of the Parties COP16 of the United Nations Convention to combat desertification, taking place in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Although I'm unable to join you in person, I want to express my strong support and emphasize of the UNCCD and our fight against the climate crisis. COP16 presents an important opportunity for experts from all sectors to explore innovative approaches so that we, the global community, can join hands together and address the urgent climate crisis. Despite all of the record-breaking temperatures, floods, and other climate phenomena experienced in 2023, scientists are predicting with certainty that the year 2024 will be higher temperatures. We do know droughts, floods, and severe weather systems in the future. We do know desertification, and we know more climate refugees fleeing their homes, more affected by devastated croplands, and more facing hunger and malnutrition. Ladies and gentlemen, we so far failed to come together to fight the poor existential threat and to secure a better future for the following generation. But your participation in this event is a clear signal that you are ready to foster and drive your own growth communities, to increase climate finance, to unlock real innovation, and to share knowledge with others. As you may know, while serving as the Secretary General of the United Nations, I worked very hard to realize the 2015 Paris Climate Change Agreement, which provides a pathway for a clean and sustainable future. Therefore, I am very pleased that so many of you have come together from around the world to exchange ideas, solutions, and best practices. I'm especially pleased to learn that CGIAR member states and partners are coming together to collaborate on clean and climate solutions for the vulnerable communities, the members of vulnerable communities, those comprised of women, indigenous communities, and young people. Ladies and gentlemen, I encourage all of you to engage with the leader who are this event in COP16 to engage with community leaders. We need to work together with urgency to build collaboration and collective actions at the global and national levels, as well as to local and household levels, spanning national borders, sectors, and social boundaries. We can still transform our economies and societies towards a sustainable and inclusive future and save our planet, but only if we work together. It is not a revolution, but it is a worthy mission. And join me. Future for all. I wish you a clean and fruitful event. Thank you, and shukran jazilan.
Thank you. I was just saying Ban Ki-moon is the president of GGI. So we are honored to share his message to the participants. I'm going to start with my first presentation. Just again, as I was saying, the idea of this event is to basically look at sort of GGI's understanding of multifunctional landscapes, share Ethiopia's journey in sustainable land management, talk about participatory land management learning over a 25-year period, and then move on to looking forward to innovation, green development opportunities in green technology and climate finance. So if I start by talking about multifunctional multifunctional landscapes, these landscapes recognize the dynamics of multisectoral development and the need for intelligent and adaptive land use planning and systems design. The aim is to plan for and capture land use synergies, balance land use interests, and reduce land use concepts. Applying a multifunctional landscape approach is at the core of strengthening sustainable land and natural resource management, building climate resilience, and increasing land productivity. The approach builds positive sector connectivity, land use and land user integration, and achieves win-win relationships and results. A multifunctional land use approach is a land governance system that requires land use planners and natural resource managers to build climate resilience and, oh, sorry, I haven't changed that one. Sorry, a multifunctional landscape approach is a land governance system that requires land use planners and natural resource managers to work in close collaboration to explore and connect the interests of different land uses and land users. And this, I would propose, is something that's always missing when we look at land use. Within rural landscapes, and we'll focus in on rural landscapes, you know, land is used for a variety of productive purposes, combinations of customary and modern crop and livestock agriculture, water resource management, and forest and agroforestry management. There is often also specific zonal use, and we're going to look at protected areas for biodiversity conservation, as well as possibly enclosed areas for land restoration purposes. Multifunctional land use approaches offer design and planning solutions based around systems mapping and intelligent landscape or land use layering. The core objective of multifunctional land uses as an approach is to enable positive land use and land user relationships, reduce competition and conflict, and promote user and land use interdependency and compatibility. So again, using a basic layering system of land use, it's possible to plan the different layers. And for this event, we're just looking at sort of agriculture and agroforestry layers, sustainable forest management layers, water resource management layers, and protected area layers. But obviously, with a full multifunctional land use, you're also looking at urban infrastructure, settlements, as well as other geological and hydrological aspects of the landscape. Moving on to these sustainable pathways for land use and management, and the emergence of multifunctional landscape management systems in sub-Saharan Africa, with a focus on Ethiopia. As I say, I want to look at two different ecological systems. Essentially, high mid-altitude montane and tropical forest and forest farm mosaic landscapes, and dry, arid, and semi-arid lowland rangeland landscapes. So both these ecological systems share numerous but similar land use challenges and have followed a similar sustainable land use management trajectory. In both landscapes, protected areas are often overlaid on the landscape often without considering those other land uses. So again, a typical forest farm mosaic landscape in the high to mid-altitude areas of Ethiopia and subtropical areas. You can see these landscapes are a mosaic of forest and farms, with land use competition clearly observed between forestry and agriculture. And agriculture is recognized as the main driver of deforestation. Similarly, with dry, arid, and semi-arid lowland rangeland landscapes, you have competition between rain-fed and irrigated crop production and extensive livestock grazing systems. And the expansion of cultivation agriculture undermines the viability of livestock production systems. And again, if we're looking at protected area landscapes, here you've got landscapes that are often protected management is overlain as a designated land use zone without accounting for current land uses and land users. And this will often lead to conflicts with land users and land uses, resulting in reduced forest and farm productivity and or encroachment on the protected area. So in both these high and lowland landscape types, the natural resource management based production systems are characterized by environmental, social, and economic fragility. In both landscapes, land use is characterized by ever increasing competing interests to utilize and exploit resources by different land user groups. And in the absence of land use system planning approaches, completing land use will lead to conflict and competition with the resultant loss in production or productivity failures. Protected areas, again, as I said, are included as a third land use category, and these are our outlier story. In our story, the protected areas predominantly maintain their restricted land use systems, and thereby, I would argue, struggle to or fail to integrate with other land uses or land users. And our second presenter will talk a bit more about his experience in that area. But if we're concentrating in this 25 years of learning in Ethiopia in achieving sustainable land management, the fundamental basis of that change was moving away from the imposition of externally designed technical solutions and embracing participatory action learning development approaches. So PLA development approaches establish working partnerships between government, agricultural, forestry or forestry extension services and highland farming or lowland pastoralist rural communities. So partnership is a key part of this. The approaches also emphasize the need to understand and build on local land use systems and user knowledge. PLA supports communities to organize and legalize themselves, and PLA enables communities to work as partners to government services. So some core principles of PLA: government and community partnership, capacity building and skills building, shared roles, responsibilities, relationships, and revenues, ownership, community ownership and leadership, and combined customary and modern technical knowledge. So as I say, PLA approaches facilitate joint actions such as natural resource management assessments, negotiations of the 4 R's: roles, responsibilities, relationships, and revenues, conducting CBO, government, forest, farm, or water resource management planning. And once those plans are developed and approved by government, you can move into joint implementation of those plans. And this system of government and community partnership has seen a dramatic change and impact in natural resource management results in Ethiopia. So the key systems that we've been developing or we've developed over this period for forests: sustainable forest management systems, participatory forest management, and sustainable lowland rangeland management systems, or participatory rangeland management. And these have been developed through experiential learning and scale out approaches in a number of countries with their roots in Ethiopia. So the processes and the systems were developed in Ethiopia. They've now expanded out, and they're working in Kenya, Tanzania, Somalia, Sudan, Uganda, many other countries have adopted these systems that were started in Ethiopia. And the Ethiopian government has increasingly started to adopt and adapt these in national natural resource management policies, and the results have been that these government community partnerships are now managing millions of hectares of land across the Ethiopian landscape. So, I mean, some results and impact in forest areas. You have the Ethiopian National Red Investment Program, which uses PFM approaches across multiple regional states and covers upwards of 2 million hectares of forested land. Similarly, in Oromia, you have the Oromia Forested Landscape Program, which covers over 1 million hectares. And these are the first programs that have started to engage in climate finance and carbon trading. Similarly, in lowland areas, in the rangelands, pastoral development programs working through or with PRM systems now cover upwards of 4 million hectares of land, lowland grazing in the main regions, lowland regions of the country. I just noted that the PRM remains predominantly led by non-government organizations. So yeah, we're presenting these as game changers, the participatory natural resource management movement in terms of building these sustainable management and utilization systems. In terms of continuing to move forward with these activities and continue to strengthen them, the introduction of participatory land use planning has been something that we've been doing in recent projects to ensure that government planning systems and community planning systems can be merged together. We've also looked at new programming, which presents a holistic forest and farm landscape restoration approach, which essentially has 4 components: sustainable agriculture or farm and watershed management, sustainable forest management and restoration, community-based organizations and the capacity building and skills building that goes with that, and then small business enterprise development, which talks to the sort of economic part of the approach. And here, further moving into sort of innovations, you can see here, this is a presentation of a one system approach. So within this poster, you're looking at participatory rangeland management in the center, and then combining these other pastoral land tenure, digital monitoring systems, and training in holistic grazing in a one system approach. And this type of work tries to bring all the actors together in the landscape to strengthen natural resource management. So my final slide that I'll leave you with is just around understanding the 6 key drivers of successful land use policy and implementation affecting government and community engagement. And these six items I would state is tenure, planning, partnerships, economics, participation, and legality. Those are the 6 pillars where we should be focusing our work. And that, I think, differs from a lot of the technical presentations that have been presented during this COP. So this focuses on planning systems and working partnerships and economy. So with that, I will leave my presentation at that and pass back to the moderator.
To the monitoring moderator who just coming on. So I'm Fiona Flintan. I work for ILRI, International Livestock Research Institute. And I've known Ben for many years in Ethiopia and in different manifestations. So, okay, so moving on to the next presentation, I'd like to invite Dr. Stuart Williams, who is the Chief Advisor of the Protected Area Directorate of the National Center for Wildlife here in Saudi Arabia.
Thank you very much, Fiona, and thank you to Ben for that. Obviously curious to see that Ben characterizes protected areas as the outlier. But let's see where we go. One of the interesting things when Ben invited me to come and make a presentation today, he said, please draw off your experiences over the last 25, 30 years, some of which in fact has been influenced by Ben himself. So this slide here is just a kind of scattergun approach to my career, which obviously covers a large chunk of sub-Saharan Africa, some of the Central Asian states, and Russia and the Western Pacific, etc. And there's a whole gamut of things that have been involved in my career, but protected areas has been really the core theme. And when I was green behind the ears and arrived into a world in Rwanda in 1997, starting off my professional career after my PhD, it really came from the sorts of protected area thinking that Ben characterized a little earlier. And I'm just going to go to the story that we're trying to take forward in Saudi Arabia today, which I think tries to do things a little differently, not the imposition of protected areas that Ben is talking about, but in fact, trying to incorporate the lessons that he taught me 25 years ago in Ethiopia, but to start to bring in participatory processes to establishing protected areas. Our goal and why this is important in a multifunctional landscape is that our goal is in line with the Global Biodiversity Framework's goal of covering 30% of Saudi Arabia, both in marine and terrestrial areas, with protected areas. And protected areas, we would hope that when we arrive at that 30% coverage, we are using not the traditional historic use of the definition of protected areas that emerges out of, particularly out of North America, which are these fortresses. But in fact, if you look to some of the models that emerge out of Europe and then subsequently other places in the world, including places like Ethiopia now, are much more inclusive of the communities that live within those areas. We are really fortunate in Saudi Arabia to have two things. The first is we have a policy environment that is profoundly enabling. So there is from the highest levels, we have a really profoundly enabling policy environment. That goes all the way from the Crown Prince through these particular aspects, Vision 2030, the environmental strategy in the Saudi Green Initiative, and Saudi Arabia's commitment within the Global Biodiversity Framework. So just a quick glance at what this means, that if that's the desirable goal, these are the sorts of things that we as an institution want to achieve along the way at the outcome level and the output level. But if we focus down into that, there are a whole lot of things which include people, which include the people that live within and surrounding the areas that are of interest to us. Again, looking at the enabling environment, there are a whole lot of key ingredients. And in fact, if you look at Ben's 6 ingredients earlier, you'll see some of the things that there are. This is actually more from an institutional level, because obviously I'm focused here on an institutional level, but some of those things are beginning to pepper in to this. And so you can see the degree of green, whether it's light green or darker green, those are the things that are either enabled or not so well enabled. In terms of the process, because we're starting, you know, the protected area system in Saudi Arabia is, in fact, curiously, just about as old as the protected area system in Ethiopia. And so there are parallels here. And so what we have done is to design a flow chart, a process for designing, negotiating, and establishing protected areas across the kingdom. And you'll notice that what we have done is we put into this a feasibility study phase and a negotiation phase. And in fact, those things align very nicely with the work that Ben has been doing in Ethiopia. One of the other parts to this is that we build on a profound and ancient history of protected areas within the kingdom. This is the example of the Haram in Makkah. But in fact, there are 2 harams, protected areas within the kingdom, which is surrounding Makkah and Medina. These are ancient institutions, closely aligned with the religion of Islam. But we also have ancient natural resource management systems, some of which date back 1,400 years. So when I work with the team in the National Center for Wildlife, I say to them, these things exist. They continue to exist. They're 1,400 years old. What we try and do now is build a foundation for protected areas that will have the same meaning for the people as these do in 1,400 years' time. So we're trying to build these things for the very, very long term and incorporate the sorts of thinking that have allowed those himmas to continue to persist for the last 1,400 years. Of course, I recognize that I work for the National Center for Wildlife, and we are primarily concerned with the biodiversity of the country and the ecosystem functions. That is the fundamental foundation from, that's the lens that we need to approach the world. However, we really recognize that conservation of biodiversity, protected areas, is really a social and political and economic game. So this is the foundation, the biodiversity, the ecosystem functions, but we do really recognize that this is a social and political function that we play. In order to identify the areas to cover 30% of the country, we went through a process to identify, and we're going through the process to select the areas that are then moving forward into a feasibility study process and then a negotiation phase. And those negotiation phases are based primarily out of the identification of stakeholders and then negotiation processes with those stakeholders and defining governance, defining management and operation of these protected areas relevant to those people, the people that live in those areas. The last part, which we are only recently bringing into this, is the systems level thinking. Much of the work so far has been done in isolation, but of course we live in a world where the climate is shifting, and we need to ensure, particularly in the arid areas, connectivity amongst all those areas. So we're looking at these things in terms of connectivity, and the connectivity is not just from an ecological basis. There's a social aspect, and there's a political aspect to these systems level thinking that we're bringing in. And you can see this really is a sketch map on a piece of paper. It's a scanned piece of paper. So we're really in the early stages of what we're doing to carry this forward. These are the criteria. You can see that ecological is important, but the sociocultural and the socioeconomic value of these areas is taken into consideration, as well as, of course, the political and the practical considerations. I'm going to zoom quite quickly through some slides. This is just our a numerical prioritization model, how we want to do this. These are some of the feasibility studies that we're carrying out. We carried out 4 feasibility studies this year. They were the first pilot feasibility studies. We've learned an awful lot through that process. And I'd just like to stay on this slide for a brief moment, because for the first time really in the history of protected areas in Saudi Arabia, there is engagement with the people in the country, the people who live within and surrounding these areas. So there is community engagement and an effort to understand the people's relationship with the land, the relationship with the natural resources, and the relationships that they have, including the spiritual and sacred aspects, connections to the land. Again, just where we are at, the National Center for Wildlife, for the first time in history this year, employed a social scientist. So it's literally, despite the fact that protected areas are a profoundly social and political thing, for the first time ever, we have a social scientist walking in and out of work, which is an extraordinary thing to me. But we are actually getting there, which is a great success. Just one of the things that this illustrates is the need for free, prior, informed consent. We are introducing the concepts of free, prior, informed consent. Again, for the first time, there is, of course, lots of learning that needs to happen amongst our friends and colleagues, because this is an alien concept if one looks at where we are coming from in terms of the protected areas. But we're having this conversation. We're getting people to at least come to these meetings freely. We are literally going through the process of free, prior, informed consent in order to secure the support of the people. And so ultimately, what we're trying to get to, and this is just an illustration, of course, it's from a marine area, but the important part here is the agreements with the fisher folk here. So as we develop marine protected areas, and I think the next slide should be for a terrestrial protected area, the most important people here are the land users, the people that live in these areas, and learning to engage with them, learning their lifestyle, and negotiating and reaching agreements on the use of this land. And here, this is one of the areas that we carried the feasibility study out this year, Himar Rabada. It's one of these ancient natural resource management systems that we're trying to regrow. And at least from my perspective, the National Center for Wildlife, for whom I work, has no role in this area. This area really should be managed by the people themselves. And this is what we're trying to do, to reach agreements with those people. There are other land use conflicts in this area. So the Ministry of Energy is wanting to put a huge wind farm in this area. Again, that requires political negotiation. There are these ancient cities. This is along a movement, a religious movement, old system. And so these ancient cities that exist along these areas of people who are on pilgrimage to Makkah and Medina. Again, this gives us a hook into ensuring that we reach these agreements. All this work is really a team effort, working with a really diverse, dynamic group of people. I'd like to acknowledge them in this work. But just the last piece of reflection that I'd like to have is that we are hoping that because the protected area system in Saudi Arabia is so young, we have the ability to leapfrog all of the lessons that have been learned, to draw off those lessons, to avoid, hopefully, all the mistakes that have been made in the past century of protected areas across the globe. and incorporate those. And so we're really trying to adapt. Sometimes it's very hard work because there is resistance. There are people who are deeply embedded in those past systems. But I think slowly, and my colleague Baha is here today. He's one of the heroes doing much of this work in our protected area planning department. So really fantastic to work with people like Baha. And I look forward to some heated conversations afterwards. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Stuart. It was really refreshing to see a presentation on the host country here, because actually that's first I've been able to see. So thank you. So I'd like to invite Mrs. Susan Payne for the next presentation. She is the co-founder of Sustainable Planet, an agri-tech startup focused on addressing food security and climate change through the production and processing of plant protein. In 2023, Sustainable Planet won the Global Food Tech Challenge. And in 2024, Susan was awarded the Woman of the Year in African Agriculture at the African Agricultural Investment Awards. Over to you, Susan.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So my name is Susan Payne, and I am, frankly, pretty addicted to Africa. And I'll give you just a short brief on my background because it brings me to where we are now. I actually am not a farmer by training. I'm an investment banker. I'm a lawyer who worked for JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs for many, many years, heading in trading desks, actually sales and trading desks. And then I managed a hedge fund for a decade. So I've actually been involved in finance for a very long time. But I was raised in Italy, and my father worked for the FAO. And what I did about 15 years ago was decide to focus on food security and climate change. And I flew around the world. I looked at all the continents that I had worked on with JP Morgan because I headed the emerging market sales desk. And I ended up deciding that Africa was the optimal place for all the reasons that we know. And so I started businesses there. And I now have a few businesses there. And the focus that I have particularly is Sustainable Planet. But I also have a fund that finances women across Africa building businesses in climate initiatives. And also I'm a co-owner of multiple farms, and I manage those farms. So I have a very good sense of what it's like on the ground to manage large commercial farms and to bring in subsistence farmers around me. Okay, so this is all the shots in my brief presentation are from, almost all of them are from our flagship site in Mozambique. And they don't have many words because I like to have a little chat as I go. We grow plant protein on non-arable land. Okay, we all know what the problems are. We're all in this COP because of these problems. So I'm not going to waste all of our time to repeat what the problems are. We know that desertification is an issue. We know that the drought in Southern Africa has been the worst in a century. We know that this is continuing, and it's a real issue. So the solution that we offer is that we can basically let multiple people eat better and have access to their own economic systems, that is, their own bank accounts. We want to grow protein, plant protein across Africa. And frankly, we have an office in Abu Dhabi, having won the Food Tech Challenge last year. We can grow it on sand here. We're also talking to Asia to grow it in Indonesia. We were allocated up to 6,000 hectares of non-arable land. That doesn't mean that we own the land. I went to the government and I saw that they had salt flats that were unusable, and we can grow on those salt flats, and we can grow hectares, thousands of hectares actually, of plant protein and employ thousands of subsistence farmers if we can actually get funded to roll this out as actively as we want to. On the right-hand side is an example at close range of what our ponds look like. There's no chemicals used, only fertilizers that are a marinure that we create, put into bags and put in each pond. The ponds are about 12 inches deep, and they can be various different sizes. And the carve-out that you see is, this is a Norwegian-funded fish farm about 2 hours outside of Maputo. We have various ponds at the base of that. And we work very well alongside fish farms and chicken farms because we can feed fish and chicken very, very easily as the lowest hanging fruit in what is available for us. Okay, so this is an impactful, sustainable superfood. And I don't say that lightly, but it is. We grow it 365 days a year. It doubles in biomass every 48 hours, so it's highly scalable. And this is really important. It's why we win multiple awards, because it is so scalable. It grows really, really quickly. It's organic. It's very easy for us to transport it. And we can create human food, animal feed, and biofertilizer very easily from this. We can create jobs for thousands of farmers. It also is a carbon sink, so we can reduce carbon emissions by producing and growing this plant. It reduces methane emissions when it's fed to cattle, and I can go into that in more detail. And other applications are possible, not just cosmetic, but also medicinal. So just to give you some idea, and we're working with ingredient producers now that want to get more of our product in Europe, but we can, you know, the most obvious is protein shakes. I live on protein shakes, so I'm a big believer. I'm a runner, and I literally live on these, which is why I'd love to be in Ethiopia for a year, because I could train, and it's fantastic training for runners. But protein shakes, protein breads, protein pastas. We've actually developed a pasta with Bühler in Switzerland, and cereals. It's very easy to put this into all sorts of different foodstuffs for humans, as well as on a nutritional basis for school programs. It can be added to enzima. It can be added to all sorts of grains during lunches for school children across Africa or any other countries where school children are struggling to get high protein in their diet. It's not just about protein. Soya is about 25 to 35% protein. This is on average between 35 and 45% protein, but also includes amino acids, omega-3, and various vitamins, particularly B12. It outperforms spirulina and chlorella quite dramatically, and it tastes much better. So our business model is that we cultivate it and we extract the protein, and then we can create food products, or we can create carbon credits. And the carbon credits section is embryonic. So I say this, but that is what we will do in the future. We're discussing methodologies now with some of these groups that actually can help us. But the technology that we have goes from creating pellets for animals. We can create a green concentrate that's quite gooey for drinks, and for capsules for vitamins, for basically for capsules to sell on the high street through, you know, retailers basically that are the health capsules. And then we can create a colorless, odorless isolate, which is a like for like with soya. And that is 75% protein. So you can't tell the difference, and you can add it to all sorts of foodstuffs. We also have different things that we have different technologies that will patent, you know, product cleaning, dehydration, sterilizing, etc. We can contract multiple smallholder farmers as our contracted farmers, and they are paid about 3 times more than their average wage in Mozambique, for example. They get better nutrition. They can diversify their crops. They often have a small holding or a very small area where they have some livestock nearby, and we can allocate them a hectare of ground with a few ponds and a small house. The difference between water lentils and soya is quite dramatic. And I've repeated some of these earlier, but I want to say them now because they're so distinctive. We want to be an alternative to soya. We're never going to replace soya, but we don't use land that is deforested. There is no deforestation. We repurpose bad land, basically. Our water use is 15 times less. The scale is 15 times more per hectare. You get 4 tons per hectare on soya, and we get between 40 and 80 tons per hectare for water lentils. The nutritional value is quite different. In social impact, the company addresses all 17 SDGs. Actually, I don't know many companies that do address all 17 SDGs, actually. There's no carbon footprint. In fact, it's climate positive. It's a carbon sink. And there are no chemicals used. We can price match. We can actually price match soya at scale. The management team is a variety of us, but we have a techie who's here, Sven. We have a stand actually in B, in the blue zone, but Sven is here with myself, and Jacobus de Klerk is our chief agricultural officer, who's a Zimbabwean with about 35 years of commercial farming experience. We have a series of global advisors in the scientific world, and we work very closely with universities, multiple universities around the world. We've won quite a few awards for this company. And I say this not because, I say this because despite the awards, let me rephrase this, despite the awards, the reality check here, and I am very, very outspoken about this, is that innovations like this, which are profound, still struggle to get funded. And I still find that shocking, which is why I'm so stridently involved in raising money for women in Africa. Because if I have struggles with this to raise money, then God save somebody with a great idea who's actually not very well educated. This model does not work. We need grant funding for things like this. We need grant funding that is much, much more scattered, not a single hit for 5 or 10 million. We need to have grant funding for a whole series of different, I come across so many innovations that are game changers, phenomenal game changers, and they wither and die because they cannot get sufficient funding. Anyway, we've won a series of awards. The most profound, I think, were probably the United Nations Award for Innovation last year and the African Startup of the Year. The company is rolling out or plans to roll out in Rwanda, in Madagascar. We're in talks in different countries, and it depends on the funding. But this is a franchise model. It's modular, it's very straightforward. This is not a complicated project. It's more the IP, and the technology transforms this. But the demand for the product is off the charts. The demand for plant protein, and even in countries like Nigeria or Pakistan, countries that are hitherto meat-eating economies, are becoming vegetarian. I'm a vegetarian, and I became a vegetarian when I was 12. This is like a century ago. But now we are seeing so many vegetarians and vegans crop up. And this replacement, we're getting calls from groups that are trying to replace their meatballs with soya because it's more sustainable using this, or national food programs across the continents. We could never keep up with the demand, even if we were at full capacity now. We could not keep up with this demand. The opportunities are across these Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, and they're quite strong. Bottom line is this. This is a good example of a nature-based solution. It engages smallholders, it's highly scalable, it's highly nutritious, and the return is very strong as well. And I think that we're going to see more, in fact, I want to see more groups that grow water lentils and harness this capability, because it is the most sustainable form of plant protein that we will ever find. And in terms of water use, it is fractional. And the water that we use can be saline, brackish, or pre-used. So it is not potable. It does not have to be potable. The water use differentiates this quite dramatically at 90% less than soya. Anyway, thank you very much, Protein Without Footprints. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing a very interesting perspective into the room. So now I'd like to pass the floor to Mr. Tero Racina, GGI's country representative in Qatar, a climate finance specialist supporting the Qatar government in its development of green growth strategies, policies, and action plans.
Thanks so much. Yes, esteemed colleagues, great to be here in this event. Bit of my background also, I, like Susan, I started in conventional investment banking, emerging markets, M&As, private equity. And then from 2006, I took a focus to climate affairs and green investments. And actually, I'm wearing double hats. So my second hat is regional investment lead in Middle East and North Africa at CGIAR. And coming to this event sort of reminds me discussions I have had with a landscape specialist. You are special people. The passion, the challenges, how holistic the approach need to be, win-wins, how the benefits are shared, and especially when we talk about money. when it comes to this issue of climate finance, that how it is mobilized, how it best benefits the broader society in terms of livelihood. And there has been lots of lessons learned, but I think never enough. Yeah. So myself, I've been working a number of different teams under climate. So you have special people. I totally recognize that after my first morning in this event. So I will first tell a little bit of our green investment practice, and then I give a bit of a broader picture still on climate finance, because when Ben asked me to do this and say, okay, you have 10 minutes to explain, climate finance in a land restoration related activities, it's a mission impossible. So I just try to highlight a couple of takeaways. I put a bit of a focus on green bonds and sustainable linked bonds, a bit more technical there. And then I also raise a program we have in Oman, where we are having a sort of a mosaic of different type of investment instruments to be combined to our approach. That shows the example probably how complex the solution side in terms of investment mobilization is. So let me start with just briefly. We operate in 51 countries, 3 best international organizations. In terms of investments, we are not investors. We are supporting our member countries to mobilize the investments. Lots of our work is upstream. We are sometimes from the scratch, from the concept to the design to the investment mobilization, working throughout the whole value chain. And also we can engage with the private sector. So my understanding is that with UN agencies, they have challenges of engaging directly with the private sector. But if there is a catalytical opportunity, first in kind, first in type, game changing, even SME, we can engage. We need to just follow the procedures, but we can have a direct mandate with the private sector counterparts in terms of innovation. Yes, let's get into it. So before coming here, I was reviewing this report, which was just launched. You probably read the same report. Some of the findings, of course, the target levels, 300 plus billion USD per year, extremely challenging. And again, here, when it comes to climate mechanisms, there's a long list of different instruments, grants, taxes, sustainable bonds, ecosystem services. So I'm going to go a little bit some of those bit in detail, and I don't want to be this encouraging, because again, you see what Susan was saying. I'm also advocating that we need more grants, more soft funding, because some of these structures which we hear, like blended finance, they need to be public-private partnerships, they need to be cash flows, they need to be bankability before we can even consider sort of blended finance type of mechanisms. Again, when it comes to carbon credits, we had a pretty successful in terms of Article 6, COP29, Article 6.4 passed, so it was approved. But again, when you think about carbon credits, those are future cash flows. They're not capex level. They're not money to actually do the initial investments. And again, the bankability of those carbon credits in terms of purchasing agreements, that what type of offtake risk there is, if it's government, if it's AAA, or if it's just microtransactions targeting retail type of investors later on. Of course, define how we can actually finance those projects based on those future cash flows of carbon credits. So there are lots of sort of limitations on this list that, okay, what can be done at the first phase when the project is planned, at the first phase of investments. And that's why we always have to struggle. The first phase of the project, where do we raise capital? Who is the financier? How is this structured? So let's go a little bit deeper. So this is sort of the typical range of instruments, and it's quite similar as on that report. We are sort of structuring national financing vehicles, very important type of structures. That there's a government-owned investment fund which can take, of course, not commercial risks, but structure sort of utility-based investments as a phase one of land restoration projects. We have different type of guarantee enhancement mechanisms. Again, if you say that, okay, there's a bit of a limitation when it comes to grants, another sector we would like to see more donor activity is enhancements. On top of those credit enhancements, we can structure much more sort of risk-taking debt capital instruments. We have also structured some debt-to-nature swaps. There was a big one in Ecuador last year, and our pipeline, I think we have 3 member countries that we are structuring those. So this is not a new instrument, debt-to-nature swap, but they are coming back. So there's lots of good momentum there in some of the member countries. So we have 2 pathways sort of when we talk about these instruments. One is sort of infrastructure finance, one is sustainable finance, where especially green bonds and sustainable link bonds are included. So I take one example when it comes to bonds. When I read this report, there was quite detailed description of sort of when it comes to draw resilience investment needs based on this report and based on the assessment. So in terms of, if you think about a green bond, those are the user procedures. Those are where the money is sort of going. And again, I'm not advocating member countries to raise more debt capital because, of course, the indebtedness in especially LDC countries, but you know, this is the instrument where we see momentum and where we see transactions. So I go a bit more in detail when it comes to typical sort of green bond type of step-by-step process, what is needed when, you know, country X, being it sovereign or being it state-owned bank, development bank, step-by-step, what needs to be done. Actually, the first step in building that capacity is that Ministry of Finance, they should have already sustainable finance framework, which is the top level document. Then it comes to specific, being it sovereign or private sector, public sector bond, sort of user procedures, the green framework need to be validated, need to be structured. And this is typically what we do. So we are supporting our member countries, state-owned banks to structure either Ministry of Finance level frameworks or specific transaction-related frameworks. Then comes the issuance itself. And again, if the transaction or the issuer is risky, we are in some cases we also structure credit enhancements to support the credit rating of the specific bond issuance. Again, there are limitations, how many counterparts, how many development finance institutions are able to offer this type of enhancements. But recently, we have seen a couple of good counterparts, PIDG Garantco or Credit Guarantee Corporation, founded last year, have this type of instruments available now. And we see more riskier type of debt capital instruments also to be issued. Finally comes, of course, the impact and MRB, the verification that there is a real green impact. And this is the element we also typically support in this type of process of issuing green bonds. I bring a couple of more examples when it comes to our current pipeline. There is a quite innovative resilience bond. The first one in Latin America, I think it was issued 2022 or 23. And as an option for green bond, there is also another instrument called Sustainable Link Bond. And we just recently, last month, supported the Thai government to issue this type of bond, almost 900 million USD. And it has KPIs, so it doesn't have a user procedures. It could have a KPIs, for example, that X amount of hectares is restorated. And typically it has also NDC levels or top level, macro level targets. So this bond issuance in Thailand was the 3rd ever sovereign sustainable link bond. We see that again coming quite strongly. And that could be interesting instrument when it comes to large scale restoration projects in member countries. Also earlier this year, we supported 2 transactions in Uzbekistan, Aral region restoration activities. Actually 2 state-owned banks issued, both of them about 500 million USD bonds. So why I'm bringing the bonds, because I see transactions, that I see anyhow money flowing in. These are not the only solutions, but this is one of the element of climate finance where we see scalable big level activities. But let's get back to the bit more practical issues. This is the program we launched last week here at COP16. It's a partnership with Oman, and it's a program called Arise. And again, it's very ambitious. It's a nature-based solution combined with approach of sustainable special economic zone in order to enhance the values chains advantages. And I hope that Susan's company would be located in that special economic zone once we're ready and you are ready. So let's talk about that. But we are starting from the scratch, basically. There's nothing there. It's degraded land. And we have a mandate to start to building the investment structure, the infrastructure for mobilizing this finance. So where do we start? Of course, we need to start from the grants. And often there is sort of matching type of grant. Oman is a fairly rich country, so they can also provide some of the soft finance matching from ODA partner. There can be also result-based grant, not only carbon credits, but specifically aligned with the targets milestones. And then this is quite interesting. We thought that, okay, this is still to be, of course, designed, but in order to provide the basic utilities of landscape level intervention, there should be very dedicated, relatively small infrastructure trust fund, where the government can then procure specific elements of the mosaic, as Ben is pointing it out, being it water management. Some of those are not bankable. Some of those need to be there before the bankable side of the big picture evolves. And the big picture, when it evolves, then it comes more sort of standardized products. Then we can talk about PPPs, we can talk about blended finance structures, and then we can talk about bonds. And then we can talk about carbon credits, that future cash flow of the activities. So it's super complex, and I'm happy to give you a report next year of our progress. So I will stop here. Thank you so much.
Yes. Yeah. Got yeah, we've got an extra. Right, we're just gonna have one more short presentation before we have open session panel. Yeah, and some questions and answers. So Mr. Henri Penn, the agricultural engineer, researcher in forestry, water and environment, who works for a reforestation project for the Coffee and Cocoa Council in Côte d'Ivoire.
Thank you. Oh. I don't speak English. If someone can help me. D'accord.
Je vais rester là pour...
Merci. Je vais essayer de tenir dans les 5 minutes. Je pense que ça devrait aller.
Try to keep it to 5 minutes.
Donc, je vais rapidement présenter le contexte de la Côte d'Ivoire, particulièrement pour ce qui concerne la culture du café et du cacao.
So I will just start by presenting the context of Côte d'Ivoire and specifically cacao culture.
Alors, on sait tous que la Côte d'Ivoire, c'est le premier fournisseur de fèves de cacao au monde.
Côte d'Ivoire is the first provider of cacao seeds.
Et donc, ce résultat s'est fait quand même avec une certaine destruction de la forêt.
So this result has been achieved, unfortunately, with a few impact on forest.
Et aujourd'hui, il faut reconnaître que c'est la forêt qui a permis à la Côte d'Ivoire de développer son potentiel en termes de production de cacao.
So, however, forest has been driver of productivity and production in cacao sector.
Le problème que nous rencontrons aujourd'hui, c'est la question de la durabilité de la production du cacao, vu que avec la destruction de la forêt, elle ne profite plus des services écosystémiques que la forêt lui offrait dans le temps.
However, we were now faced with the sustainability of this production because the forest is not anymore producing as it was. So there's a reduction also in productivity.
Donc, en Côte d'Ivoire, c'est beaucoup de petits producteurs de cacao qui sont, on totalise au total 1 million de producteurs sur des petites superficies.
The ecosystem is based on multiple number of farmers, and we have approximately 1 million farmers that are scattered across the countries.
Et donc, aujourd'hui, il faut se poser des questions parce que les producteurs ont eu l'habitude de cultiver sur 1 hectare, ça produit. Quand la terre est dégradée, ils vont sur une autre terre.
So now the question is about improving the techniques because the farmers are used to produce on 1 hectare. When they are reaching the maturity, they look for other lands to produce.
Et donc, maintenant, il nous faut changer de manière de produire, vu que nous avons atteint quasiment les limites du pays.
So we now need to change the techniques to produce because we have reached the limits to production and productivity.
Dans notre ancien modèle de production, le cacao a exercé une forte pression sur l'environnement, donc sur la forêt. Le nouveau modèle que nous voulons adopter, c'est un cacao qui est plutôt ami de la forêt.
The previous model had a high pressure on the forest, but now the new model is looking at being more sustainable on forest.
Et cette démarche se base sur la stratégie nationale de préservation, de réhabilitation et d'extension des forêts.
We are looking at the national strategy to preserve forest.
OK. Et donc, globalement, qu'est-ce que nous allons faire? Le Conseil du café cacao va prendre la chose en main.
So the institution Conseil Café Cacao is leading towards that implementation of that strategy.
Et va initier ce qu'on va appeler le programme de contribution à la reforestation.
So it has initiated a program called Contribution to Reforestation,
Ce programme va prendre en compte les réalités des producteurs de cacao.
which takes into consideration the realities of the farmers and producers,
Qui sont en réalité dans tout l'écosystème là, les populations les plus vulnérables.
which are in fact the most vulnerable population throughout the ecosystem.
Donc, on a 2 éléments fondamentaux. D'une part, on a la dégradation des forêts et d'autre part, on a la vulnérabilité des producteurs.
So first there is the degradation of the forest and then vulnerability of farmers.
Et c'est là que justement les paysages multifonctionnels cacao vont rentrer, trouvent leur pertinence.
Okay, and this is where we're linking with multifunctional landscape that can be enhanced.
L'idée ici, c'est d'accroître la résilience de la cacaoculture vis-à-vis du changement climatique et de garantir la durabilité de la production de cacao, tout en améliorant les conditions de vie des producteurs.
So the idea is to increase the resilience of the production, but at the same time to improve the lives of the farmers.
Et voici ce qu'on espère atteindre en termes de résultats. Donc, il s'agit de transformer 2,5 millions d'hectares de café de cacao en système agroforestier.
So the objective is to transform 2.5 million hectares of café cacao into agroforestry systems.
Et d'introduire 100 millions d'arbres forestiers dans le paysage cacao.
And introduce 100 millions of cacao plants throughout the ecosystem.
Donc, ce sera pour produire 250 millions de tonnes équivalent de CO2.
Okay, so the aim is to produce 250 million ton equivalent of CO2.
Et ce projet devra assurer un développement en milieu rural
Okay.
à travers le renforcement de 450 PME ruraux, de 300 organisations de femmes.
This will also induce the creation of 450 small and medium enterprise, as well as 300 women organizations.
Et donc, autour de ça, pour aller rapidement, ça va prendre en compte tous les objectifs de développement rural que nous notons ici. Et ce qu'il faut préciser, c'est qu'en Côte d'Ivoire, la Côte d'Ivoire a adopté une norme qu'on appelle la norme RS1000.
So this features these main pillars of the SDGs, but also Côte d'Ivoire has adopted a standards, which is Réseau 1000.
RS1000, la norme.
RS 1000, so CSR 1000.
RS1000 pour le cacao durable.
C'est quoi RS?
RS, c'est une codification. Bon, je vais continuer, c'est pas grave.
OK.
OK.
L'équivalent de RS 1000. It's
Donc,
the codification of the standard.
En gros, c'est comme une nouvelle norme qui impose l'agroforesterie comme système de production de cacao en Côte d'Ivoire.
Okay, which harmonize the agroforestry as a standard basis for production of cacao in Côte d'Ivoire.
Donc, ça traduit la volonté de la Côte d'Ivoire de changer totalement d'orientation et de désormais travailler à la préservation seulement de la forêt, mais en même temps à travailler véritablement sur la question de la vulnérabilité des producteurs de cacao.
So this translates the idea and the vision of the government to actually work on the preservation of the forest, but also work on the vulnerability of the farmers in the country.
Alors, merci beaucoup. J'ai essayé d'aller rapidement pour tenir dans les 5 minutes. Et si je dois terminer globalement, c'est de dire que la Côte d'Ivoire, c'est le cacao. Et le cacao de la Côte d'Ivoire, désormais, ne va plus détruire la forêt.
So I've tried to be brief and within 5 minutes, but I would like to finish by saying that Côte d'Ivoire is cacao, and the idea is to make sure that the cacao production is not anymore impacting land degradation and forest degradation.
Et dans le contexte post-forestier actuel, le cacao représente justement une opportunité importante pour la restauration des forêts parce qu'elle permet justement aux différents producteurs, aux 1 million de producteurs, de contribuer à la reforestation.
Okay.
Merci.
And it contributes to have 1 million producers be involved in the wider ecosystems. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And actually, if you'd like to take Yep. So yeah, Alola and Dureji and who else? Lilsigat. If you'd all like to come up to the no, please, if you'd like to come up here and sit up here, and I will ask you a few questions. So here we have, sorry. So here we have Mrs. Olola Vieira, country representative, Côte d'Ivoire Global Green Growth Institute, supporting the Côte d'Ivoire government in its development of green growth strategies, policies, and action plans. And then we have Dr. Lilsigerd Desta, who's the director for the Multifunctional Landscapes Research Area in the CGIAR, working for the Alliance of Biodiversity and CIAT, and currently also serving as interim director for the CGIAR Multifunctional Landscapes Science Program. And Dureji Wakjira from the IGAD Center, the director of the IGAD Center for Pastoralism and Livestock Development. So, Dureji, first of all, I'd like to ask you, do you think that the concept of multifunctional landscapes is relevant for the drylands, rangelands, and pastoral landscapes in which most of your work focuses on?
Thank you very much, Fiona, also for diverse presentation to put things into context. The answer straight is yes, but, and then I will try to explain why I'm saying so. IGAD, Intergovernmental Authority on Development, is a regional organization of 8 countries in the Horn of Africa. We have 5.2 million kilometers square in terms of size. That's not very much important. The most important thing is 70% of the land is arid or semi-arid land. And then I go back to the question that is multifunctional landscape relevant to this land use context? You know, for many years, the economic plan, the development discourse is from agricultural focused, that is the 30%. We have now close to 300 million population. We need to generate what the ecosystem give us to survive in the Horn of Africa. We have 70% of the land, dry land. What do we do with it? And we need to generate for people to survive, for economy to grow, and for people to prosper. If you leave your 70% out of the calculation, we will all struggle. That's why I'm saying, yes, there must be something to be done. You know, as any land, it's also a mosaic landscape. You see patches of grassland, you see settlement, you see bushland, and so. But the scale is different. You know, when we see the highlands of Ethiopia, mosaic landscape, you can zoom in by your eye. When you go to the dryland area, the scale is bigger. You need a little bit upper land to see visually, because that is the ecosystem, because you can't concentrate high productivity in an area. And that's how it is created. That's where the scale comes. In the past 10 years, IGAD has been driving drought resilience program in the Horn of Africa since 2013, just coming out of the shock of 2011 droughts that took life of people and livestock. We are in the 3rd phase. Why I'm bringing this is the region has one key role. It has a capacity of convening, and we managed to mobilize around 2 billion towards resilience building. And when we look back, what was the focus? The focus was resilience building of household. So building resilience to drought so that people will cope up. And when you reflect back now, we worked in 4 areas: on natural resource management, mainly water and also animal feed through range management. We worked on looking for better market for people who are producing there, mainly for livestock. We also worked on diversifying the livelihood, because there are people who are not doing what the main economy is doing. That's livestock. When we reflect back, there are issues now. We focus on household because we wanted to address the impact of drought. And then the issue is much more broader than that, because you need to look at things in the landscape level, because you look for water, You have built your ponds, it might be like not there in 2 years because of the landscape is not well protected, siltation is there. You look for groundwater, there is within few years, losing of what you have from groundwater in natural resource management, and so on and so forth. And we are thinking now, how can we build a resilient system in broader aspects, looking at the ecosystem, looking at how the ecosystem is functioning, looking at also broader than really not household level, but the system as a whole. And one of the two initiatives that we are doing now is at the regional level, we are attempting to expand participatory rangeland management. And the reason why we are doing this with partner is land is a communal land, traditional institution used to manage and govern, but it's really dwindling at rapid pace. And the key ecosystem are being for grab for different purposes, including large scale investment, but also locally for small holding. And that key ecosystem is the one which really build resilience, and we are losing it at rapid.
Right.
We look at participatory rangeland management at institution building for the governance, institution building also to look for reinvestment. But when we look at this, what are the challenges? The challenge is yet that people look at huge land, not willingness to calmly sit, understand, and continuously build. But we wanted to have a result. We wanted to quantify in money. You look at your calculation, it doesn't make economic return. But you need time, you need scale, you need commitment to change that land. And I could have said longer. Sorry, I don't want to take longer.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, the importance of having those structures and governance in place before restoration or other interventions happen. Over to you, Alola. What do you see are the opportunities and challenges to the adoption of some of the new green technologies we've seen in this session?
Thank you. Thank you first for inviting me as a CR representative from GDGI to this panel. I think we are collaborating with CGIAR on a wider aspect. But to your point, I've been really pleased and also comforted to see some of the technologies and production and business model presented. But I think the challenges still exist. And I think it was mentioned by even some of the former people in the financial sector as the key information being available first, and also for upfront cost and capital investment being available, even if the business model is sound enough. And on top of it, to introduce additional green technology, you also need to have a wide ecosystem for supply chain that is set up in the country. When it comes to looking at lands, for instance, specifically on introducing new agri-tech or renewable technologies, if you look at the context in Africa, the issues is that there is no local production, for instance. And so you would automatically face up with acquiring and having additional cost on your raw material and on your initial material. So the introduction of and the acceleration of that green technology to support or climate smart agriculture practice would be automatically higher, right? So the impact would be more important. But there are obviously ways and partnership that you can build in order to make sure that you can reduce those costs. But it also takes agreement. And additionally, one element is also, and I think before that, is the enabling environment at the country level to make sure that the policy is in favor, maybe more specific policies toward the sector for a certain period to encourage introduction of those technologies in specific markets. But however, I think it's definitely an opportunity because it creates new type of jobs. So an opportunity in terms of green jobs, employment in certain value chains. Also an opportunity in terms of economic growth, looking at certain sectors such as circular economy, for instance, or agriculture that we mentioned and discussed, which are quite, for instance, in Côte d'Ivoire, topical in terms of contribution to the GDP of the country, and definitely an opportunity to make sure that there is also contribution in terms of climate impact reduction, but also looking at the reduction in terms of land degradation impact. So using green technology can reduce some of the impact on production that we have in certain value chains, and it contributes in our perspective in terms of economic growth in some value chains. So obviously there is more to discuss around it, but we are initiating a program also in the country, which is focusing mainly, it's around a 9 million program, which is focusing mainly on increasing greenpreneurship mindset through digital technologies. And it will aim to support 45,000 young entrepreneurs in the countries, well, beneficiaries, but focusing at approximately 1,000 small and medium enterprise, which could be in agriculture, in renewable energy or circular economy. So we see it as an opportunity, but there are challenges to bridge together. Yeah. Thank you.
And then look, Vilsagat, with your long experience of multifunctional landscapes, can you just briefly tell us, what are some of the major challenges that you faced and are continuing to try and address?
Okay, thank you. So time is up, so I will be very brief. Two elements to mention. Number one, in the multifunctional landscapes domain, it was presented that we have to consider the different users where there are different actors, competition, and so on and so forth. So partnership and collaboration is key. It is important that we bring the different actors together so that we collaborate on the ground to align the needs and interests of different partners and actors. That's number one. Number two, it's mentioned already by our colleague who's presented from Mozambique. Most of the time, land restoration, sustainable land management, we require more resources and the longer-term investment. But most of the time, the investments are short-term and limited. So sustainable finance is key. So I think we have to work closely together to make sure that there is sustainable finance adequately allocated for these engagements. So I think these are key. I don't want to go longer because Ben is warning that we have to finish quicker. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much. Sorry for that kind of bit of a rush at the end, but we started a bit late and overtook some time. So thank you very much, and thank you to Triple GI and Ben for organising this. Hope you had a interesting